name is Rebecca DesPrez. Oh, okay. My name is Rebecca DesPrez. I am Zoroastrian. I'm originally from Iran. I am here to discuss the Zoroastrian religion and basically the common values we have in Zoroastrian religion with the Unitarian Universalist Church, and how these values have originated from Zarathustra's thought. So I'm gonna see if I can share some slides with you. Bear with me, I'm not very good technologically. So let's see, how do I, and we go here. Okay, here are the slides, great. So not many people, I don't know if you have heard of this religion. It's called Zoroastrianism. We call it, those of us who are within the religion, we call it Mazda Yasno, which means the praise of wisdom. It's a very old religion. People usually often, when I talk about Zoroastrian religion, people often don't know what it is. And I usually start by introducing them to three wise men, because that's who everybody's familiar with. You all heard of it, heard of them. The story in Gospel of Matthew of the three wise men who followed the Star of Bethlehem to find Christ. Of course, the three wise men were the three magi. The magi's were the Zoroastrian priests. And that's the common basically point between Christianity and the Zoroastrian religions. The Zoroastrian religion was a dominant religion, and that was a common point that the Christianity started having with the Zoroastrian religion. But Zoroastrianism started centuries before Christ. Started with this man called Zarathustra Spitaman. The Greeks knew him as Zoroaster. We call him Zarathustra in Iran, but his name is Zarathustra. He grew up among the Iranian tribes, pastoralist tribes, probably during the Bronze Age. Based on his language, we think that he lived around 1700 BCE to 1200 BCE during the Bronze Age. Now, we don't know where he lived exactly, but we know he lived somewhere in Central Asia, somewhere in north of Afghanistan, today's Uzbekistan, somewhere there. So his religion starts there around 1700 BC, but by 1000 BCE, his religion spreads to Iranian plateau, to Iran, to today's Iran. And eventually it becomes the dominant religion of the three Persian empire, the Achaemenian, the Parthian, and the Sasanian. And so the religion becomes dominant all the way till 640 CE, when we have the Arab invasion of Iran. The Iranians eventually become Muslim, the majority of them, and the Zoroastrian religion becomes a minority, persecuted minority within Iran. And eventually we have migration of Zoroastrians after Islam, first to India in 10th century, and to modern times to Europe and America. And that's why you see a lot of Zoroastrians in the United States and Europe today. So this was a really brief history. I just wanted you to know a little bit, brief history of the Zoroastrian religion. Another thing about it is, as I said, we call it Mazda Yasno, the praise of wisdom. Another name for it is Dana Venui, good conscience. And why we say that? Because the slogan of the religion is good thoughts, good words, and good deeds. So that's why we call the religion good conscience. Now, a little bit about the basics of it. We believe in one God, Ahura Mazda, basically means great wisdom or the wise being. The word Ahura is masculine word, means being. Mazda is a feminine word, means wisdom. So Ahura Mazda, the wise being, is a neutral being, we believe in one God. In fact, Zoroastrian religion is considered to be the first monotheist religion. The sacred book is called the Avesta, and the oldest part of the Avesta is called the Gathas. The Gathas are the 17 songs of Zarathustra. They are in Gothic language, which is very close to Vedic Sanskrit. And what we are going to discuss today, the ideas that I'm talking to today, is based on the ideas in Gathas, is Zarathustra's own views. Some of the views in the Avesta, which came later, thousands of years later, as a little bit contradiction, but today we're gonna focus on the Gothic view and Zarathustra's own ideas. Now, when we think of humanism and these cherished ideas today we have in Western world, we always think of the Greek philosophers, don't we? We always, the father of humanism is Anaxagoras. But people don't realize that Anaxagoras was an Ionian Greek. He lived in the Persian Empire, within the Persian Empire, and he had close contact with the Magi, with the Zoroastrian priests. And he even, good point that he even fought with the Persians in the Battle of Salamis against the Greeks. He was very close. He got his ideas, many of his humanistic ideas that is based, today the humanism is based on, he got from the Magi's, and he transported them when he went to Athens to his student, which we all know was Plato. Plato knew about Zoroaster. Not only Plato, but many of these Greek philosophers knew about Zoroaster, knew about Zoroastrian ideas. His idea of good and evil, many of his ideas on creation are very close to Zarathustra and taken from Zoroastrian thought. Plato himself wanted to go to Persia, study with the Magi, but he couldn't because of the Great Persian Wars. It prevented him to go there. Another good example is Pythagoras, who went to Babylon and studied with the Magi. So these Greek philosophers took many of these ideas that I'm going to discuss now they were influenced from Zarathustra and Zoroastrian religion, and they transferred and transmitted these ideas to us today. Unfortunately, Persians do not get the credit where credit is due, mainly because we are considered as barbarians by the Greeks. And the Western world has a grotesque view of the Persians, unfortunately, without realizing that many of these ideas we have today actually originates from Zarathustra and from the Persians. And I'm going to discuss that. Starting with freedom and democracy. We all cherish this idea of freedom is central to the Western thought. Unitarians, of course, cherish that. We all do that. But Zarathustra was the first person who talked about freedom 1,000 years before the Greeks. And in his fourth song, he tells us that when God created us, when God gave us body and soul and conscious, the next thing God gives us is free will, freedom to choose. So freedom for Zoroaster and for Zoroastrian is a God-given right. It is in the core of the Zoroastrian religion. Zarathustra tells us that in many of his songs tells us that we have a choice. We are free to choose between good and evil. We're free to choose that, but we will see the consequence of our action. I want to show you one of our most sacred Zoroastrian prayers. It's called Yatho Ahu. Yahweh tells us that both the spiritual leader and the political leader should be chosen so that they can go and help the poor people. They have to be chosen based on honesty and truthfulness and righteousness, so they can be able to go and help the people. As you see this prayer, the central core of this prayer is choice, to be chosen. This prayer does not mention Zoroaster or the Zoroastrian religion. It is emphasized is on the choice, because freedom was so much important in the Zoroastrian religion. And of course, this influenced the ancient Persians. You probably heard of Cyrus the Great. He's the founder of the Persian Empire. He conquered Babylon in 530 BCE and freed the Jews, the Jewish people. He is the only Jewish person who is considered to be a Messiah in the Old Testament. He was a Zoroastrian. He was very much influenced by Zoroaster's thought. And when he conquered Babylon, he gave freedom to all the conquered people. We see this in his Cyrus Cylinder, where he came and he gave freedom of thought, freedom of religion, and freedom of culture to all the conquered people. And he wrote that in, we see that today in Cyrus Cylinder. And incidentally, Thomas Jefferson was a great devotee of Cyrus the Great. He had 3 copies of Cyropedia, The Life of Cyrus, and Cyrus the Great was a model for Thomas Jefferson and many of our founding fathers because of Cyrus's emphasis on freedom. And of course, Cyrus Cylinder is considered the first human rights charter. So Cyrus was himself, of course, influenced by Zarathustra and Zoroastrian thought. The other thing that I want to discuss here, the other value that we have in common with many Unitarians and with Western world, is the gender equality in Zoroastrian. Zarathustra emphasized always the equality between men and women. We have many prayers for women, including this one you can see, Song 4:1 from Heptan Haiti. This song is 4,000 years old almost, this prayer. It praises the women, and the Zarathustra tells us that there is no difference between men and women. The only difference they have is based on their truthfulness and righteousness. That's why many of his early followers were women. His own daughters helped him spread his message. A queen, very famous Queen Hattusa, financed his religion. So he has always addresses men and women. When we make a prayer, we always address both genders, and they are equal in the eyes of God and in Zarathustra's philosophy. And that emphasis on gender equality and the importance of women, of course, influenced the ancient Persians, who gave women equal rights. In ancient Persia, in 500 BCE, we have women who can own property. They could inherit property. They owned vineyards. They owned workshops. They could go out and work. And when we had Persepolis fortification tablets come to light in 1970s, when archaeologists translated these tablets that were discovered in Persepolis, the capital of ancient Persia, we found out that when men and women were paid equal for the equal work they did, which eludes us even today in this country. In 21st century, we still have not achieved that. But we have, with the tablets, we have the proof that both men and women were earned, they had the same ration. And by the way, this freedom that ancient Persian women had actually amazed and surprised the Greeks. When you all know about Herodotus, he's the father of history. When he came to Persia to write down his histories, he observed the Persian women and he frankly was mortified. He ridicules the Persian women for sitting down, having dinner with their husbands. He ridicules Persian women for making decisions in family affairs. He ridicules women in his histories for dancing in parties, things that we very normal now in Western world. But the Greeks didn't have that because frankly, the Athenian women did not have those rights, could not get out of the house without the husband's permission. That's why it was very surprising for Herodotus to see women unsupervised walking in the streets in ancient Persia and working in markets. So it's something that it comes, this kind of respect for women and equality actually has roots again in Zarathustra's thought. The next thing I want to talk about is diversity, inclusion, and universality that we have. It's in the core of the Unitarian people we all respect. In this country, we are very proud to be such a diverse, such an accepting culture. United States consider itself a melting pot. We have different nations living here with their language. That started with Zarathustra when at that time, every town and city had its own god. The Babylonians had Marduk and the Greeks had their own gods, and the Egyptian Osiris. The Iranians had Anahita and Mithra. But when Zarathustra came and brought Ahura Mazda, and he said, brought this god and asked us to worship Ahura Mazda, his god was a universal god, did not belong to only the Iranian people. It belonged to everybody. It was the first time somebody talks about a universal God. And that's why many of Iranian, even enemies, the Turanians who were enemies of Iranians, actually followed Zarathustra and joined the religion because Zarathustra's emphasis on universality and inclusion of everybody, regardless of their race and language and tribe and the city. And that emphasis on diversity, of course, influenced the ancient Persians. 44% of world was ruled by the Persians, and they were 25 different nations lived and worked under the Persian Empire. And the Persians were very open to accept these people. They were Africans, they were Egyptians, Jewish people. There were a lot of Greeks who actually came and lived under the Persian Empire. There were Indian, all these people, they lived. It was the first, basically, the melting pot. Long before the United States, the ancient Persians were very proud of inclusion. And Themistocles, it's very interesting, he was a Greek general who defeated the Persians after the during the Battle of Salamis. He defeated the Persians, but later on had to flee to ancient Persia and lived in ancient Persia. He got asylum. He got political asylum in ancient Persia and was protected after he fled Athens. And the Persians accepted him, even though he was the enemy, even though he had defeated them. They gave him a state, and he stayed there until the end of his life in today's Turkey, which was part of the Persian Empire. So again, the diversity and inclusion we have today has roots in Zarathustra and ancient Persia. The last thing I want to talk, and I make this short, is the environment. Of course, we are all very concerned with climate change today, with what is happening to our Mother Earth, to pollution. But it is interesting that this concern about preserving the Mother Earth and protecting the environment even concerned the Zarathustra 3,500 years ago. That's why we have a lot of prayers to, like this one, to the earth and to God's creation. There are 4 elements in Zoroastrian religion: the sky, the earth, water, and fire, that they have to be kept clean. We cannot pollute these. It's a sin to pollute the air, the earth, and the water. That's why the ancient Persians did not throw their garbage in rivers, did not pollute the sea, did not want to pee in the rivers, which brought much ridicule from the Greeks, who thought the Persians were crazy not to throw their garbage in the rivers. But we know why today, why we need to preserve the earth, why we need to preserve all these elements. And the Persians were so much worried about polluting the earth that they did not bury their dead into the soil, just like many Native Americans today, just like Native Alaskans. Ancient Persian exposed their dead. This is a tower of silence. Up until 1960s, Zoroastrians were allowed to expose their dead to elements. Then they would gather the bones and bury them in stone coffins. But it was now, after that, it's illegal. But traditionally, they exposed their dead, the Zoroastrians, on the top of the mountains, or things like Tower of Silence, like the one you see here, because of the respect they had and the worry they had about the environment. Another thing that is very important for Persians is, and for Zoroastrian in particular, planting tree. Cutting trees was a sin, and making garden was basically a religious duty for Zoroastrians. The word paradise is a Persian word, comes from paradisos, means the enclosed gardens. And this kind of gardens with trees and waterways, people from ancient times built those kind of gardens as a religious duty, as a respect to environment. And this is the legacy that it has come to us, of course, should have also have that kind of legacy. So that was it. Thank you so much for listening to me. This was a very brief, condensed, and very fast overview of some of the common values we have with the Unitarians, with the Western world. I hope you enjoy that. I will stay during the social time for any questions or comments you have, and I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you so much for listening.